Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, September 5th. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times News organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for all you do for the Washington Times. Our moderator for the Washington Brief is Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. He's a commentator on security issues. Formerly, Ambassador DeTrani was special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea and the director of National Counterproliferation Center and associate director of national intelligence. Also on our panel of experts, we have Dr. Alexandre Mansourov. Dr. Mansourov is an adjunct professor on security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He is also adjunct professor of Korean studies at the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University. Our guest panelist today is an expert on the whole situation in Northeast Asia. We've met him several times on our Washington Times Fact Finder. He's worked over 42 years in the U.S. government focused on Korean Peninsula issues as a senior policymaker, senior negotiator, senior executive manager, and intelligence officer. He serves as National Intelligence Council's National Intelligence Officer for North Korea from 2020 to 23. He has also served as the Department of State Special Envoy to the six-party talks, the White House National Security Council staff's Director for Korean Affairs, and a senior command analyst for the U.S. Forces Korea. He's had assignments across the intelligence community and senior management, analysis, and operations, to include the Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Officer of the Director of National Intelligence. Mr. Seiler served over 17 years working in Korea, has native-level fluency in Korean, and was a member of the Senior National Intelligence Service from 2006 to 2023. He's a recipient of the National Intelligence Service Superior Service Medal and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joint Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, the president of the Republic of Korea's Chunsu Medal, Order of the National Security Merit, and the Crypto-Linguistic Association Rochefort Award, and the Defense Language Institute's Commandant's Award. Joe, we're going to have a great day today. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's an honor being here with all of you. And it's great having Syd Seiler with us. This is going to be a very excellent discussion. Let me just open it up by expressing our deep condolences for the passing of Governor Richardson to his family. He was a great American patriot. He cared so much about the Korean Peninsula and so many other issues. And the passing of Governor Richardson touches all of us. This has been a very impactful, eventful month since our last Washington Brief. We saw the Camp David session, a very historic session between President Trump, well, certainly President Biden and his counterparts in South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, and in Japan, Prime Minister Kishida. This was a major summit, and I applaud what what President Biden did in reaching out to both of these leaders. And it brings us closer together on enhanced deterrence, looking at what's happening in the region, certainly in regards to North Korea, but indeed China also in that equation, where there will be more consultations. There will be joint exercises between the three countries, as we recently saw, and a lot of consultations at the highest levels. But also we've seen over the last month a closer relationship between North Korea and the Russian Federation, where North Korea is reportedly providing artillery shells and rockets to the Russian Federation for their war in Ukraine and for other purposes. and in regards to receiving at least some energy assistance and some food assistance. Again, these are all reports that are out there. This past month has been a very, very eventful month in so many other ways. We just saw a recent exercise by North Korea using tactical nuclear weapons offensively and launching 2 cruise missiles that flew over 1,500 kilometers. Very, very significant development. So we're honored to have Syd Seiler, because as Michael said, over 40 years of looking at the Korean Peninsula, but indeed North Korea, this is a man who has unique insights. So over to you, Syd Seiler. I know we're going to learn a lot from your discussion today.
Joe, thank you very much. And Dr. Jenkins, thank you so very much for that kind introduction. It's great to see a lot of friends here who we spent much time talking about this issue, and every time a little bit different, a little bit more challenging, a little bit more troubling. And I wanted to do today is kind of briefly look at the developments that we've seen on the ground of late, some of which, Joe, you've laid out before us, some of which really go over the past year or two of the developments in the nuclear and missile program. Kind of talk about briefly what this could mean going forward, and why, as troubling as these developments are in terms of the currency, the longer term prospects are really what needs to be not only the concern of analysts and Korea watchers universally, but also policymakers and operational planners who are looking at what to do about this issue. And then finally, maybe talk about time permitting some policy approaches going forward. In terms of the recent developments on the peninsula, again, as somebody who landed on the peninsula in 1982, in the midst of a lot of rumors about Kim Jong-il possibly seeking to unify the peninsula by his father, Kim Il-sung's 70th birthday. I got there about early in April, before the April 15th birthday, and spending that first year in Korea really focused on whether we were going to war or not, and during that time period, the Burma bomb blast, when North Korea commandos traveled to Burma to try to assassinate then President Chun Doo-hwan. And so I spent 40 years looking at wars and rumors of wars, state of the armistice, strengths of the armistice, weakness of the armistice, and exercises, both team spirit, large maneuver exercise scale events, participating in team spirits, and then participating in later Old Chief Freedom Guardians and other tabletop, computer-based exercises, etc. And my only conclusion can be, as we look at what's going on right now, there's a good news and a bad news aspect to it. And the good news sometimes is the bad news, right? The good news being that I really do not believe we're headed toward any state of conflict potentially in the near term. And there's, as much as the rhetoric and the reports and even the exercises and the accompanying choreography of them, we're not in a state of increased tension that has me worried about, war breaking out in the next few weeks or few months. Of course, that good news is also the bad news, is that as you look at the developments on the peninsula, they seem to be like the proverbial frog in the pot of water. The water just gets hotter and hotter. The frog is anesthetized and doesn't jump out. And, this is one thing that as a Korea watcher, we need to be extremely careful of, is that we don't get, complacent. We don't get hypnotized by a seeming repeatable cycle of periods of exercises marked by North Korea's threats and responses, alleged tactical nuclear weapons training, alleged hypersonic glide vehicles, and tsunami-like weapons that can go around, and attack covertly in the middle of the night. That we look at this choreography and we understand it for what it is, but then we also at the same time look at what is happening in the advancement of the program. And particularly, Joe, you and I worked this very closely together for many years, particularly in the 2000s and the early 2010s, when we saw the program growing, the sophistication, both of the fissile material production, quality and quantity that North Korea was making progress with, and the missile program at the time, and the type of missile challenge we faced with, I'm thinking of like the 2006 Taepodong missile launch, the 2009 launch, et cetera. But from 2016 onward, we do see a very deliberate march by Kim Jong-un to really firmly establish the credibility of his full force, with a focus initially on ICBMs, to try to, in the 2016 to 2017 time period, take advantage of progress being made in the liquid fuel realm and establishing and projecting a capability to range the United States with nuclear weapons. A lot of elements of that not fully completed. That didn't stop North Korea from declaring towards the end of 2017 major progress toward that end, and the development of a capability to now decouple. They didn't use the term decouple, but they've used the term of being able to deter outside forces so that South Koreans would know whenever tensions on the peninsula would rise in the future, their security would be at risk. And since that 2016 to 2017 missile campaign, we've also seen significant advances following the year and a half of the Charm Offensive. And we've seen North Korea pursuing longer range ICBM, having said at their 8th Party Congress that they would seek to develop one that could range 15,000 kilometers with a heavier payload. Progress in the solid fuel arena, the Hwasong-18, cruise missiles, tactical warheads, SLBMs, unmanned aerial vehicles, military reconnaissance satellite, not yet launched, but all the elements of a fully orbed nuclear capability are coming into play. We can have debates about just how much progress technically has been made and how many of these capabilities are actually fully deployed and fully credible. But what we do know is this is the intent and this is the path going forward. So in addition to the bad news of the developing capabilities, we do see also training events. Now, the challenge to the North Korea training event is it is a made-for-television event. And, ask anybody in the military who has, trained to create training films or projections of military capabilities through some type of media presentation. There's going to be elements of reality to it. There's going to be elements of exaggeration to it. I like to use the term semi-Potemkin with North Korea, because when you look at North Korea, many aspects of what they claim to have accomplished, I just picture in the back of my mind the Yugyung Hotel sitting there as this massive edifice, right? And we know the facility isn't open because of building defects. When you look at the North Korean capabilities, you see part reality, part aspiration. Comfort that might be taken, perhaps, is that, again, we're not in a place where this is a fully, ready to fight force. But at the same time, the discomfort is in the fact that they are moving forward with trying to train, trying to have a doctrine, and trying to portray themselves as having these. When you want these for coercive purposes, the actual readiness, the capability may be secondary as to the perceived, as opposed to the perceived capability. And moreover, finally, the intent. That's the other third element of the bad news, which is this willingness to openly threaten the Republic of Korea with nuclear weapons. When the diplomatic campaign of 2018 and 2019 began to fizzle along a timeline maybe somewhat impacted by novel approaches from the U.S. side at that time under the Trump administration. But once that Charm Offensive came to an end and they returned into the missile launching period of April 2019, we began to see this direct development of shorter range capabilities to try to develop and demonstrate a credible tactical nuclear warhead that can range South Korea. Prior to 29, I used to tell my Korean friends, remember that the North Korean ICBM, at the end of the day, targets South Korea. Of course, in terms of its range and the goal of delivering a warhead to a target in the mainland United States, it targets the United States. But the ultimate purpose of it, the ultimate telos of it, to use a term from philosophy, right? The ultimate goal, the end state, is to hold at risk South Korea and to be able to coerce and threaten South Korea, complemented with shorter range ballistic missiles, with miniaturized warheads that can be lower yield and thus perhaps from Pyongyang's perspective, more viable battlefield weapons. This has been North Korea's goal for some time, and this is what we've seen developing over the more recent path. So, from Pyongyang's perspective, remembering that North Korea developed these weapons not necessarily, as is often stated in the propaganda, is often believed, unfortunately, by a few too many people, in response to U.S. aggression and overthrowing Saddam Hussein, or in 2006, or Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. This program predates that. It is a key element of North Korea's survival strategy as they watched all the other Eastern European states collapse with the end of the Cold War. And their desire since that point has been to reestablish a dominance on the peninsula over South Korea, and to be able to be in a position in order to kind of dictate the future of the peninsula, increasingly aggressive in the conventional realm, increasingly threatening in the nuclear realm, and hopefully, but we can't rule it out, potentially aggressive in an offensive manner, in a way that Kim Jong-un, watching what Vladimir Putin has sought to accomplish in Ukraine, watching what Xi Jinping and his people are thinking about and allegedly preparing for in terms of using military force potentially to resolve the Taiwan issue. What we have is a Kim Jong-un who potentially may believe that nuclear weapons would enable him to use these newfound capabilities, that he has invested such a great amount of actual and diplomatic and political capital into, and achieve some type of return on investment. In the interest of time, I'll cut my remarks there, but for reference in terms of these possibilities, a few months ago now, the DNI authorized the declassification of our national intelligence estimate from early this year that looks at these potential defensive, offensive, or coercive nuclear use scenarios. It concludes that a coercive scenario is most likely, short of offensive, short of launching a war. But let me say two things to that. First of all, you cannot rule out that objective for North Korea, and this is the area on which all of our focus from an intelligence perspective, from a policy behavior shaping perspective, or from a military planning deter and defeat perspective, this is where our focus needs to be. The possibility of increasing coercion over time and the increased escalation and miscalculation risk that we'll face on the peninsula. So these are the drivers, I think, going forward in terms of moving beyond when's the next test, when's the next launch, what does this rhetoric mean, what does that rhetoric mean? It's how we come together. Joe, you mentioned earlier the trilateral summit that was recently held here, and how that just really complements and amplifies the enhancements to extended deterrence in the region, so that Kim Jong-un knows definitively that any use of nuclear weapons brings an end to his regime. Reminding him of that, reminding Russia and China of that, seeking to partner with the international community to try to deter North Korea. These are all the challenges that we will face going forward. So let me cut it at that, and so we can have a little bit more discussion.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you, Syd. That's a lot to unpack. You talked about coercion and that NIE, and I recommend it to everyone. It's online and it's unclassified. It's for the public to peruse and to educate oneself on, because there's a lot in there. You mentioned coercion and also miscalculation, and that's always the issue here when we're talking about nuclear weapons, and now with North Korea's policy, if you will, of a nuclear first use policy, a doctrine, if you will, of preemptively using nuclear weapons, and knowing that they have a limited, in my view anyway, intelligence capabilities to determine what is a so-called imminent threat. So there's so much to unpack, Syd, and I looked at Alexander. Alexander, if you would start the conversation for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Syd, what a pleasure to see you again. Welcome to the brief. But let me begin by seconding Ambassador on a solemn, kind of sad note. I would like to join his condolences, deepest condolences to the family of the bereaved Governor Richardson, who passed away a couple of days ago. This was a major loss for the process of peaceful reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. He did a lot to help not only all those who are stranded and foreign detention all over the world, to bring them home to freedom, but also to advance the peaceful agenda on the peninsula. So my deepest condolences to the family. Now, Syd, I have a lot of questions for you, but we have a process here. We try to be disciplined, so I'll start with a big one, and if we have time, I hope Ambassador will give me a chance to ask another question. But my big question is really about the geopolitics of what's going on in the wake of the trilateral summit at Camp David, which is assessed as a tremendous victory for the United States, an ultimate gain for Japan. But as you know, in South Korea, it's seen with more skepticism. Of course, the government came out kind of lauding its own accomplishments there, but the opposition is very much concerned. Our good friend Moon Jae-in is very skeptical about South Korea having gained anything at all, and probably having lost quite a bit as a result of that summit. That said, I'm not going to get into the South Korean domestic politics, but for an outsider, the way it looks is definitely, I don't think you can argue about it, but the trilateral summit at Camp David proved to be another nail in the coffin of the united front of five powers formed to contain North Korean WMD proliferation. Because clearly in China and Russia, it's assessed in very negative terms, ridiculed, etc. Now, what you briefly alluded to, the fact that North Korean-Chinese relationship is picking up, the borders have reopened now, they're planning to resume bilateral trade finally with the new bridge, the spectacular bridge across the Yellow River is going to be commissioned in the days ahead. But if you look at the North Korean-Russian side of the equation, it's even more amazing what's going on there, especially in terms of the political cooperation. September 9th, major celebration, 75th anniversary of the founding of the North Korean state. We know 5 years ago it was the chairwoman of the Russian upper house of the National Assembly which visited Pyongyang. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if former President Medvedev pays a visit on the 75th anniversary to say thank you to Kim Jong-un for his steadfast support for Russian actions in Ukraine, which will up the ante. Again, maybe before the end of the year, we might see even a summit between President Putin and Kim Jong-un. Who knows? But the political relationship is moving up so fast on the one hand. On the other hand, military-to-military exchanges in the wake of surprise visit by Defense Minister Shoigu, clearly, opened up some eyes to the new possibilities which were precluded before. Again, I'm not worried about North Korean supplies of ammunition for Russian artillery in Ukraine. This is all bogus. This is all part of strategic communication by you know whom. That's not really what's happening. But what could happen is, the initiation of military education and training. With the two countries exchanging some quote unquote scientific knowledge about the lessons learned from what's going on in Ukraine and in other military conflicts around the world. And we could see very well some probably joint exercises, military exercises, not necessarily, in your face naval drills, but possibly, search and rescue at sea, if you wish, or counter-piracy type of exercises as the first step to kind of probe the waters, joint cooperation, military construction, what have you. And of course, more worrisome would be in the wake and in light of the expanding trilateral cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. We might see the the initial moves to start up the trilateral cooperation, military cooperation between North Korea, China, and Russia. Again, as the current Russian ambassador in Pyongyang alluded recently to the fact that the bilateral Russian-Chinese naval drills, an established practice, but it would be only proper, he said, to invite North Korea to those bilateral drills in light of trilateral military exercises between the Western allies. And further down the road, again, it's hard to rule out the possibility maybe of even a trilateral summit between Putin, Kim, and Xi down the road. Again, if the current trajectories in Russian-American and Chinese-American relationships were to continue. So my question to you is very simple. Now, can three nations, South Korea, Japan, and the United States, succeed where five nations, those three plus Russia and China, really failed in resolving the North Korean nuclear program? And if yes, then how?
Well, I'm so glad, Alexander. It's a great layout of the emerging diplomatic dynamics and the questions that these relations pose in terms of, in particular, neo-bloc geostrategic competition. And I'm glad you mentioned the Putin-Kim-Xi summit, because that's just something that's worth putting out there and pausing and thinking about what that would look like. Go back, look at the Camp David summit, look at all the areas of cooperation against across national security, economic, trade, political issues. Three world leaders coming together, having a mature conversation about advancing, rules-based international order, strengthening cooperation in Northeast Asia for the peace and prosperity of all involved, as opposed to what a potential Putin-Kim-Xi summit would be able to project. You laid out a large number of possibilities. Again, I'm happy. I think you and I were on different sides of the issue back in the 80s, right? And you have a unique perspective, and some of the principles that applied then apply today. Particularly in terms of risk and gain calculations in Moscow regarding a growing closer relationship with North Korea. What is it that that Russia would be seeking, other than the immediate transactional benefits of portraying partners ideologically in terms of their efforts in Ukraine, and materially and more concretely in terms of providing munitions and other support. There's a transactional dimension that benefits Russia, and it's relatively low cost. But what would be the longer term implications of the type of relationship that you portray, particularly if at some point in time, you have the issue of entanglement, that Kim Jong-un wants to take tensions on the peninsula to the next level, seeks Putin's approval either before or after the fact for more aggressive convention or, heaven forbid, nuclear actions. And what would the risk to Russia's reputationally be? And I think the same goes, of course, for China. I don't know that when you talk about resolving the nuclear issue, all of our talking points, and I won't repeat them. But I focus on the NIE. When we started, the National Intelligence Estimate finds its roots really in my thinking back in the 2016-2017 time period. When you look at the pace at which North Korea was pursuing capabilities that, for all intents and purposes, in terms of strict deterrence on the ground, I won't talk about the political importance of Kim needing an arsenal to establish his legitimacy at home, but rather when you look at the actual threat that he faced from the United States and the Republic of Korea, there was none. 70 years, armistice has stood solid. 70 years, the U.S. has maintained peace to enable the prosperity of South Korea, actually prosperity throughout Northeast Asia, to include China. So what was the reason for all this investment in capabilities that from a military perspective simply weren't needed, unless they were looking at capabilities either to deter more robust conventional actions or to enable a revisionist solution to change the balance of power on the Korean Peninsula through the use of force. That is what drove the initial thinking on this model of where is Kim hoping to be in 10 to 15 years, and therefore. Where we are today, the NIE now having been published, those three scenario potentials are broad categories. There's not three distinct scenarios, but if we are going to see a more coercive North Korea, what would it look like? What would the goals of Kim be? And how could we best deter it? The extended deterrence conversation, really needs to take into account the unique nature of the actor we are trying to deter. And I think when you look at all the various military options, the strengthening of capabilities, left of launch, right of launch, conventional posture, extended deterrence posture, extended deterrence training, demonstrations, et cetera. And as you look at the diplomatic side, this administration is hitting some home runs. And I think that the Trilateral Summit in particular, sent a powerful message to Pyongyang and to Beijing that U.S. remains a welcome partner in the region, an actor for positive, peaceful change and advancements. And in Tokyo and Seoul, we now have partners like we do throughout the world who have that same type of commitment. And anybody who would like to disturb that order is going to have to face some pretty strong alliances. So in terms of solving the nuclear program, it is regrettable that China and Russia have not been more cooperative, particularly since 2019. They have their own calculi, right? They probably figure that there's not much they can do, that, short of their own use of military action or aggressive sanctions, which we likely won't see, they're not going to alter Pyongyang's behavior. That may be their calculus, but nevertheless, it's very regrettable that they are the ones that broke that five-party cooperation, not the three leaders at Camp David.
That's a very Syd. Those are very powerful comments to Alexander's excellent questions on that. Camp David, as you said, was historic. I mean, bringing these three countries together, the United States, and I applaud what President Biden did in this regard, bringing Kishida with the President and Yoon Suk Yeol together and saying, look, we have a lot of history here. We have a lot of tension in that history, but we have some common issues that we have to address, and bringing those national security issues to the fore, very, very significant, extended nuclear deterrence, and the ability and the commitment the U.S. has made on extended deterrence to these two close allies. It's a powerful message, I would think, throughout the region, Northeast Asia, but certainly to the DPRK. There's no question about that. Syd, let me pivot from some of the comments that Alexandre made on some of these alliances, some of these relationships we have. We saw a BRICS meeting also, and we're looking at an extension of the BRICS, bringing a number of countries in there. But I think it's so much different than what we see between China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, because these four countries, I mean, we're talking about autocracies that have a certain rule, and it's not the rule of law, it's the rule of man, and some of the other issues that are related to these four autocracies that have come together. The BRICS, I think, is totally different. It's a different equation when we come and look at that issue there. But I want to sort of pivot to what Donald Trump did in 2018 in Singapore. I know he took a lot of criticism on that, but I think it showed an element of Kim Jong-un saying he wanted to reach out to go beyond Russia and China. He wanted to go beyond being tethered to China, certainly to China, where they are totally dependent on China for their economic survival, and reach out to a broader community. Now, that didn't work out because we saw what happened in Hanoi, because there's much more than the Yongbyon. It's the highly enriched uranium program and North Korea's commitment and their desire to be accepted as a nuclear weapon state. And I think this has got to be in the fore. We've got to look at this. This is something that North Korea has been pursuing, and Syd, you know this so well from your negotiations with North Korea, acceptance as a nuclear weapon state. So we know that this is the rub that North Korea is up, but we also have seen indications from Kim Jong-un, but even Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un's grandfather, Kim Il-sung, when they were reaching out to the United States with certainly with the agreed framework and in 1994, Kim Il-sung getting actively involved in seeking some sort of a rapprochement, if you will, movement towards the United States. So I guess my question is this, Syd: if there is an opportunity here of giving North Korea, as we've done in the past, sort of an off ramp, where they can, with keeping face, they don't want to lose face or anything like that, and keeping some respect, and so, but an off ramp to say, okay, maybe we will look at lifting certain sanctions and so forth. Have we been as aggressive as we should be in trying to move North Korea away from what? Look, my personal view is I don't think they want to be tethered to Russia or to China. I think they want to open that up, but as a nuclear weapon state. How do we get the two together? We've known this has always been the rub, but are there incentives we could put out there? More, if you will, innovative approaches to dealing with North Korea to get them to stop, and I'll end on this, to stop producing fissile material for nuclear weapons and to stop launching ballistic missiles, not only intercontinental ballistic missiles, but short-range ballistic missiles that could affect our allies in South Korea and Japan.
Joe, that's a great question. I think if we look at and we examine Singapore and Hanoi and what transpired during that time period, in which, first of all, having somewhat, predicted a pivot to diplomacy in 2018, even in the middle of the 2017 missile launches, because it would have been very consistent with North Korea's behavior to push through to an R&D objective. And once you achieve that objective, you pivot back to diplomacy to mitigate the pressure that's resulting. You let diplomacy run 6, 12, 18 months, and then you go back to where you had been. The pivot to diplomacy on North Korea's part was neither the response of brilliant diplomatic play by the U.S. and or the Republic of Korea prior to January 1st, 2018, nor the result of some unprecedented military intimidation on our part. So the pivot to diplomacy was anticipated. The way Singapore unfolded was interesting, and it was the unique dimension that President Donald Trump brought to it in his willingness to meet with Kim Jong-un. And in that time period, remember, Kim Jong-un has not had a lot of experience in diplomacy, particularly following the collapse of the 2012 Deep Day Understanding. Not a lot of demonstrated interest in or capabilities in diplomacy. And then suddenly he's meeting with the President of the United States. And if you look at how and what Kim was seeking to achieve through that, which was not necessarily a breakthrough in relations with the United States, period, but rather an ability to have a new relationship with the United States that accepted North Korea's nuclear weapons status, took the denuclearization issue off the table, or was willing to talk to it within the broader context of global denuclearization or peninsula denuclearization, or even some type of multinational arms control, but never came to the table with an intent to explore what an improved relationship with the United States might be if the North were to resume its commitment to the elements of the September 19th, 2005 joint statement, well known to everybody here, in which North Koreans committed to denuclearization, and the other 5 parties made some serious commitments to everything North Korea has always said that it wanted, or has articulated its desire. At the end of the day, you can argue about economic assistance, normalization relations with the United States, normalization of relations with Japan, and security assurances. So when you look at the objectives there, and I think after Hanoi, when Kim found out that the president himself was not simply in pursuit of a novel new breakthrough in relations with the DPRK, but was focused on making progress towards denuclearization, this is when North Korea began to lose interest. They lost interest in their dialogue with South Korea toward the end of 2018. Already by early 2019, progress in inter-Korean relations and projects and cooperation were slowing. Several meetings with Xi Jinping, and a lot of difficulty in sitting down with President Vladimir Putin. I think, in my own personal opinion, it's because of Russia's own reluctance at that time, at least. You can talk about their actions or their willingness to implement sanctions as a separate issue, but they're not ready to openly declare acceptance of a nuclear North Korea. They're, as you know, they take, in terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, IAEA role in denuclearization seriously, and Kim, frankly, at the end of the day, saw little value in pursuing any major breakthroughs with Russia. And so what I conclude is I look at that period, and you look at the history of these advances that have been made in terms of progress with the ROK, progress with the DPRK, with the United States. There's a secular motion. It's not a perfect cycle, but there's periods of improved relations that always terminate at some point and return to some status quo ante. At a time when there's a breakout in the WMD program, their capabilities advance. And, what's new now that actually bodes, I think, poorly against a possible re-examination by Pyongyang of a relationship with the United States is a perceived need, a perceived lack of need to have that relationship with the United States. If Pyongyang's view of the world is that there is this new world order emerging and this neo-bloc geopolitics, this ability to turn to Russia, to turn to China, to turn to Iran, I appreciate what you say about the resentments of the relationship and the dependence on China. At the same time, the relationship and the type of reliance, maybe not dependence, reliance on China brings much less baggage, much less demands, much less of a threat to domestic control that a sustained improvement of relations with the United States or a sustained improvement of relations with the Republic of Korea might bring. I mean, if they couldn't make a breakthrough with the Moon Jae-in administration, who are they going to make a breakthrough with? If they were unable to take advantage of Donald Trump's unique approach to diplomacy and what he put on the table in front of them, where are they going to find another president like that? So the sad truth is that international trends point towards North Korea that may feel it is less dependent on the need to denuclearize, to have sanctions lifted by the United States, to improve relations with the U.S., to improve relations with South Korea. And for now, they at least have ideological bedfellows who will be a little bit more, a little bit less demanding and a little bit more conducive to North Korea's diplomatic national security goals. They'll find them in Moscow and Beijing more so today than they have in the recent past, and therefore I think less likely to be inclined to turn to us or to the ROK.
Thank you, Syd. Thank you so much. Alexander, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. I have a comment and a question, a comment related to Ambassador's point about BRICS and its expansion, which just occurred. 6 new nations joining BRICS starting January 1st, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and another country. So it's interesting that the question of North Korea joining either BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation Organization has come up lately in light of North Korean interest in multipolarity, in light of North Korean perception that the world is getting increasingly fragmented, that the United Nations system is getting increasingly fractured. And by the way, it's not really serving North Korean interests that much. And what's interesting is that it's North Korea which has not yet expressed interest in joining those 2 alternative international organizations. And it's quite understandable given its appreciation of sovereignty, of independence, Chuche style kind of foreign policy. Even in Soviet times, Kim Il-sung refused to join the Council on Mutual Economic Assistance, let alone the Warsaw Pact, so kind of pursuing that independence line. So again, Moscow, Beijing, Delhi, or Tehran are not going to invite Pyongyang to join those organizations unless Kim Jong-un expresses that wish and stands in line maybe for several more years to come. But it's a possibility, and if the world continues to fracture and segmentize, I wouldn't rule it out. That's a comment. Now, a question for Syd is somewhat technical, but also policy related. North Korea botched 2 space launches, one in May, one in August. Why? How serious are these setbacks? Are there any implications, domestic, political, for Kim Jong-un, maybe program development-wise, or should we be happy that sanctions are working? Maybe our countermeasures are proving to be effective. Again, I don't know what's going on here. But in light of those 2 botched space launches, I hear the talk between Russia and North Korea about the initiation of space cooperation, which is at the official level, by the way. And in terms of maybe Russian launches of North Korean satellites or Russian help to North Korea in constructing satellites or kind of refining the way its space launch vehicles work, that final stage. or maybe even sharing data from Russian reconnaissance satellites with the North Koreans. So my question is, what can the United States do to dissuade and block these two hostile powers from initiating cooperation in quote-unquote space exploration, other than expending it, their sanctions and kind of naming and shaming these two countries in the international fora, which we know does not really work that well?
Well, Alexander, your comments bring to mind why space launches are prohibited under United Nations Security Council resolutions because of the application of the technologies to the ICBM program and the threat that they pose to the region, particularly in terms of the way North Korea in the past has conducted them without the requisite notifications, et cetera. I don't know if good is exactly good news that these satellites collapsed. I think any indication that a capability or a threat is not advancing is welcome news. It's welcome news, and North Korea has stated it will try again. There's no reason to believe that they won't. And in terms of Russia North Korea space cooperation, this is obviously something we need to look at closely going forward. One would think that if somehow this was kind of interesting, as somebody who was involved in the late Clinton administration era, so the Madeleine Albright delegation visit, subsequent meeting in Kuala Lumpur, where we were having some discussions on missiles, how close they were to any success, different story, but the idea that other countries would be willing to launch satellites for North Korea has been of little interest to Pyongyang, because at the end of the day, Pyongyang has not been looking for, just merely the satellite alone, but rather using, with the Taepodong launch of 2006, 2009, 2012, et cetera, using space launches as a pretext to advance ICBM capabilities. Of course, the Kims would love it if one of these worked, right? If they were able to launch it, put it up, and it was spun around the Earth. We had the reporting from South Korean exploitation of the satellite, the first satellite that collapsed earlier this year, that it was not a credible military satellite, it wasn't that sophisticated. And so, once again, we're reminded North Korea is not a space power. And the idea that it would put so many resources into this capability, it makes no sense economically. It's a pride thing. It's a matter of identity. And personally, this is not in no way a statement of policy. Nothing I'm saying today is a reflection of U.S. policy. By the way, that goes without saying. But that a third country would offer satellite services to North Korea would enhance their reconnaissance capabilities, et cetera. But that a country would actually help North Korea achieve progress on the missile side, that would be troubling. And that's where one would hope that common sense would just set in. What advantage is it to Russia's national interest to advance North Korea's space missile program?
Thank you, Syd. So, Syd, if let me just make one or two comments and then a final question to you, Syd. The human rights situation in North Korea is dire. We all know that. We saw in the 90s where a significant percentage of the population, we're talking about million plus people, died of starvation. We're talking about the potential, as we speak, of food scarcity and the potential for further starvation in North Korea. Hopefully that never happens, obviously. But the whole question of the human rights situation in North Korea and improving the lives of these 25 million people. So my comment is, I think all of us agree we need to be talking more about what's happening to the people in North Korea. We not only see this from the escapees who talk about the dire situation, the human rights report that just came out of our State Department, and also the United Nations and the recent meeting on the human rights situation in North Korea. So this is something that I think really needs to be in the fore, and I think we all agree it needs to be in the fore. Obviously, it's the nuclear issue, it's the missiles that have captured everyone's attention because it's the potential for conflict and the devastation that nuclear weapons and conventional weapons would do to the people in South Korea, Japan, the United States, and the region worldwide. But the human rights situation for the 25 million people. So just a note of how I think more needs to be talked about, more needs to be done in this regard. But my question then pivots right back to where I said we have been focusing on, and that's the nuclear and the missile issue. And my concern, and I think it's all our concern, is accidental conflict, stumbling into an accidental war, whether it's conventional weapons, and God forbid it would ever be tactical nuclear or strategic nuclear weapons. And now with this preemptive policy that North Korea has of using even nuclear weapons, if they perceive an imminent threat to the survival of the leadership or command and control. How do you see that whole issue of accidental conflict on the Korean Peninsula? And are there mechanisms, given that the lack of communications between the North and South, between the US and Pyongyang, are there mechanisms in place so that we do not stumble into accidental war on the Korean Peninsula?
Okay, Joe, great questions. I'll take them in reverse order. I'm kind of somewhat eccentric and an outlier on this one. I'm really less concerned about accidental conflict in terms of a series of events that escalates into a conflagration that one side or the other had not initially intended. I think I think back on August 2015 with the landmine incident, and why I was relatively calm through that process is because I knew, fundamentally, Park Geun-hye in South Korea didn't want war, and Kim Jong-un did not want war. And we have two sides that, and this is the unique nature of the armistice state, right? You're in this constant state of hostilities, but demonstrated value on both sides not to resume a war, right? Whether it's because of the economic damage to South Korea that would bring about, or the fact that North Korea knows that the U.S. ROK force would overwhelm them in such a case. So I'm pretty optimistic on de-escalatory possibilities when some chain of events might otherwise occur unexpectedly. And I do believe that North Korea has many ways we can communicate with North Korea. Period. When we don't communicate with North Korea, it's usually a matter of choice, not a matter of capabilities. It's not that we don't have phone numbers, or we don't have emails, or we don't have the ability to get megaphones and just yell at each other across the DMZ up at Panmunjom. There are communications mechanisms that make, particularly a situation where both sides are looking to de-escalate. I'm more worried about the premeditated nature of the growth of North Korea's program, and Kim's view, captured again in the NIE, that these weapons could be used in a way, limited use, to achieve limited but important strategic objectives of weakening the alliance, breaking the alliance, driving U.S. forces off the peninsula, blackmailing South Korea, shaking them down for compensation in a way that leaves North Korea in a much better political, economic, and national security position than they are today. And that as Kim watches Ukraine, as Kim watches Taiwan, and Kim believes he may be getting a green light from either Pyongyang or from either Moscow or Beijing, that now is the time to complete what they were unable to complete in 1953. So that's what I worry about more. And that's where I think, we need to do what's necessary to prepare for that, but we also need to be thinking about how we deter the greater conflagration, North Korea's use of nuclear weapons. The until that point, the victims of all this are the North Korean people. Whether it's in terms of call it a human rights issue or a humanitarian issue, the degree to which we should condemn the North, we should message so that people in North Korea know the outside world cares, or that we provide opportunities. I just think about the dialogue that I personally had with North Korea interlocutors while we were at Dalyutai, you and I, during the six-party talks, the conversations that we would have about potential for a new future US-DPRK relationship. Later on, right after Kim Jong-un took power, when we concluded the Leap Day understanding of 2012, the alternative picture that we painted for our counterparts, not naively. I know all the reasons why they don't take the carrots, right? Or what Donald Trump put on the table, in terms of the new transformed US-DPRK relationship. There are better lives for North Koreans available. There is an improvement in the humanitarian situation. This is why I reject those who would say the human rights or humanitarian issues need to be laid aside in the pursuit of denuclearization. Because I think a North Korea that's authentically and credibly pursuing denuclearization is also looking at ways to improve the relations with South Korea, resolve the abductee issue with the Japanese, and work with the international community to help improve the lives of the North Korean people. And that should be our goal. We should never go to sleep rest assured that ICBMs aren't going to hit us tonight, or if you're in Seoul, IRBMs aren't going to be dropping in your backyard. Yes, that's true, and that's a significant accomplishment of the combined national security effort and our alliance, the deterrence that we have on North Korea. But we should never go to bed at night without thinking a little bit about the North Korean people and the suffering they endure because of the policy decisions that their leadership has made over the years.
Wow, that is powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Syd. And I think we all agree with you. Totally agree with you. Powerful comments. We thank you, Syd, for your great service and your continued great service and the insights you provided to us today. Very, very excellent conversation. Thank you, Dr. Mansourov, for joining us. Syd, again, thank you so much. Over to you, Michael.
Ambassador DeTrani, again, another excellent show, and moderation was wonderful. You always bring out so many insights and help us to understand better the current situation. And Dr. Mansourov always giving us challenges, but also insights and understanding. And Mr. Syd Seiler, we're so happy to have this opportunity to work with you. And again and again, and we look forward to further collaboration. And I want to thank Chris Dolan, the president of the Washington Times, who always makes sure that the program is covered by our best experts in global security. And also, I want to thank also the Guy Taylor, our international security team leader, who has really gained a lot of understanding from this program. He really appreciates what we're doing here. So again, we look forward to the first Tuesday of every month. We will continue to further seek understanding and dialogue, and also to really help the partnership of America, Japan, and the ROK to enter further discussions with the rest of the six parties